Yum, yum!
Before I start, I want to acknowledge that there are much easier ways of creating a ribbon, sweeping a profile along a curve, procedurally or directly. If that's all you need to do, this isn't the video for you. You can just use a curve sweep and be on your way. But if you want to make the most convoluted, complicated, unnecessary ribbon through space and time, well, you're in the right spot. So let's do it. I made this a little while ago for myself. I needed it. I had a need to create a ribbon where I could control the deformation at precise points along the curve. Yeah, so I made this. I don't know if it's the best way to do it, but I thought this was also a good example for showing off a number of things that make Modo unique. Certain little Modo-isms, like its global order of operations for deformations. We're going to get into some schematic, constraint, relationship building. And then in a second video, I'm going to show you how to add better controls and how to package it all up for an assembly. So I'm going to hit Command-N or Control-N to make a new Modo scene. And I'm going to rename my default empty mesh item layer to Profile, because that is what we are going to make first. Then I'm going to turn on the Curve tool. I'm going to turn on snapping. I've got grid snapping turned on. And I'm going to just zoom in here and do some equally spaced points along the x-axis. Bam, bam. There we go. And let me just select this in polygons mode. If you didn't know, a curve is a polygon. Let me turn off snapping. So when you select it, it will activate the curve tool, which will allow you to edit the points if you wanted to. And you don't need to drop a tool before you activate another tool. So I'll just hit R to activate the scale tool. The tool handles come up in the middle of the curve. They'll always come up in the middle of the geometry if no action center is activated. And I'm scaling this because I want this to be 500 millimeters across, because we're going to mirror it. I want it to be 1 meter across. No reason, just a nice round number. So let's scale this using an origin action center. And then I can set this X value to be 50%. There we go. I could have also, without an action center, turned on snapping, use my grid snap or even point snap to snap somewhere, These are really handy things to know if you're going to become a regular Modo user. So I'm going to try to throw in as many other ways of doing things as I can, provided that they are not too much of a tangent. All right, so we have our profile. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bend it using a deformer. So let's go to the deformers here. As long as you have the thing that you want to deform selected, it's going to automatically hook it up for you. And so it comes in, here's our bend effector. And if you can't see it, you might have locator visibility disabled. So there it is there. And I'm going to put it on the x-axis, and I'm going to set the length to be the length of our curve, which is 500 millimeters. There we go. So now if I select that effector, and I'm going to select the angle channel here, see this little gray bar? If you just select anywhere on that, you'll select the channel. You won't select the channel if you press that. That will set a keyframe. I see that a lot. So in items mode, I'm going to hit 5 to go into, I think it's called part mode now actually. Hit C will bring up the channel hall. I'm going to just kill snapping again here. And this is a great little tool. So you can just click and drag anywhere inside the 3D viewport and drag left to right. See that little picture on there? I can't zoom in on it, but that's saying the right mouse button. And then this is side to side. So if I drag side to side, I will haul on that channel. That is one way of changing the information in this channel. I can also haul on these guys right here. It's not as fun. Or I can just punch in an actual value in here, like say 90 degrees. And I actually don't need to even have my bend effector visible. It'll still work. And I find it a little distracting, so I like to hide it. Now we're going to get into some procedural steps. So let's open up the mesh op stack here. And you can already see our bend effector right there. This is the influence for the bend. And so anything we add on top of this will happen as a second step. So let's add a mirror. You can see that it mirrors it over, and we want to merge the vertices. So I'll turn that on. And so if I go into vertex mode and lasso select this, you can see that I have one vertex selected, so it indeed did merge the vertices. But if I go into polygons mode, I can see that I still have two polygons. I don't really know why, but all I know is that we're gonna have to merge these. So I'm gonna go merge, polygon merge. And you can see now that I have one curve polygon, and then my bend effector is now this nice little control to symmetrically bend this guy. Okay, so that is our profile. The next thing we're going to need is a path on which our profile will be swept. So I'm going to hit N to make a new empty mesh item layer. Let's call this path, and let's go back to our regular toolbox, activate the curve tool. Let me just go to a front view here. And I'm just gonna throw out some curve information. There we go. It's okay, so that's our path. Now, we are going to sweep this profile along the path. We need this curve on the path. And one way you can get a curve or anything onto another curve or path is with a constraint. So the constraints are up here in this other toolbox. It's got all sorts of fun things for constraints and dynamics and particles and blah, blah, blah. And we're not getting into any of that. We are going to work with the constraints. And you can see everything is grayed out at the moment. That's because we need to select things in a particular order. So the first thing you're going to do is select the thing that you want to constrain. And I'm going to hold Shift and select the thing you want to constrain to. And now we have some options here. And so I want a path constraint. But oh no! What do we have here? Things look a little bit broken. So I've staged this error a little bit to show off a bit of information you need to know about constraints, about Modo's deformation system. So the constraint, the path constraint, and you can see that right now if you hit this plus sign, there's the path constraint right there. So the constraint is not something that you can change the order of, unlike the mesh ops, where if I reorganize these steps, the thing actually builds up in a different order. I'm really changing the order of operations here. But the path constraint kind of is happening at all times and happened before the mesh ops, even though these were added beforehand. One way you can see that is to open up, look up here. So I have this little tab button. Anywhere there's like a tab viewport, you can add another tab. And I'm going to go into the deformer list. And this will show us all of our deformations in order. So if you have a bunch of things, like you've made other mesh items and they have mesh ops, they're all going to get piled into here. It's a global order of operations. And you don't see the path constraint in here. That's not really a deformation, I should say. So that's why it's interfering with the way our mesh ops are stacked. And we can't change the order of that. And that's fine. We can work around that. So what we're going to do is create a new mesh item layer, and we're going to call this path merge, or profile merge, sorry, profile merge. And we're going to merge this profile into that one, and then we're going to constrain the profile merge to the path. And before we do that, we have to disconnect our path constraint. So I'm going to grab our profile, and I'm going to add it, add selected, to the schematic. It automatically brought in my path constraint for me, which is nice. And let's take a peek at what's going on here. We have the path constraint, we've got the profile, we've got yellow circles on these inputs and a gray one on the output, and then we've got a yellow diamond over here. What does it all mean? So in the schematic, when you see a yellow input or output like this, it means that there is something hooked up here that's just not visible. It's not currently part of the schematic. And if you double click it, it will be introduced into the schematic. This is kind of a nice thing about the schematic. What it means is that you don't have to have everything in here for things to still exist with the relationships between them. This is very good for managing messes, really. A lot can start happening in here, and it can become really complicated to read. So if you don't actually need to see it, like for example, this matrix compose right here, you can just hit backspace to remove it from the schematic without deleting it from the scene. However, if you press delete when you select a node, that will actually delete it from the scene. So there's a difference between backspace and delete in the context of the schematic. Okay, so I'm going to take this profile merge here, and I'm going to add an operator. I'm going to add a merge mesh, and we're going to merge the original profile into here, like so. And let's add this to the schematic. There it is. And let's disconnect these channels here. You can see our profile goes back to where it was. And now we're going to hook this path constraint up to our profile merge. And so you can see we need to add the world position and world rotation channels to the schematic. We can find those over here in the channel panel with the profile merge selected. So I'll just grab those two channels and I'll add the selected channels to the schematic, and I'll plug these in. There we go. Cool. Now this path constraint, let's go back to our properties, has some controls here that we're going to use later to create our ribbon. So I'll select this path offset, hit C to bring up the channel hall, and you can see that this moves this along the curve. But we've got some problems here. Right there. See that? See that? See how it flips? That is not going to make a nice ribbon. So we need to figure out a way to keep that on one side of the curve. And that is an up vector issue. Basically, what we're saying over here, where it says up vector, so a positive 1 value basically points y up. So this curve just knows that upwards is this way. It's referencing y, positive y, as its up direction. And that's not really enough information, particularly when it gets swirled around. Doesn't know which way up is. It's like a little roller coaster. So we need to give it something better to reference. And so we're just going to use a different axis. So I'm going to use the z-axis. So I'm going to change this value to 0. I'll change this to 1. And now you can see it's pointing down the z-axis. And we can just roll this back into place. So I'll put -90. So keep that in mind. You might have to change your up vector depending on how your curve is oriented, but you have some good controls here. There are more complex ways that you can assign an up vector to like a separate object, for example, but we're not going to be getting into that. Okay, so now we have a way of first deforming something here at the origin with an effector that exists at the origin, and then that goes along a curve, carrying along with it any deformations we add to it here. So now we need to make our ribbon. So let's add a new mesh item layer. We're going to call this ribbon. I'll add it to this schematic. There we go. And we are going to use an array, particle array. So let's go particles to array, using our profile that's been constrained to the curve. So let me plug this in here. And if you select the particles to array, it's going to show you a preview of the positions for each of your array points. You can see that the feature is using position. And it's also, if I select the profile merge, it's creating a position at each of the vert points. What this means is you could change your resolution by changing the number of points along here, which we can do procedurally in a number of ways. I'll show you one of them. So if I grab the profile merge here and add an operator, I'm going to add a curve rebuild. And you can see that here are the hidden mesh item, the mesh ops, I'm sorry, connected to both the profile and profile merge. They exist in here. In the mesh op stack as well. So it's kind of same. People kind of get confused sometimes in terms of like, oh, if this is here, is this something else? It's not. It's same. If I select this this item here, you can see it selects here and it selects here and it selects in here. So same. They're just represented in different places, and you can do different things to these items in different contexts. Okay, so we added this curve rebuild, and our curve is now somehow over here, and it has an additional 20 points. Just turn off the use world transform so that it goes back to using our constraint. And now we have this channel that we can use to change the point value. Let's go back into being able to see the points here. So that's a nice procedural way to adjust the resolution, which will make more sense in a moment, but I do want to show you another way to do this. I'm just going to remove these mesh ops from the schematic. I don't need them in there, and I don't want to create more of a mess than I need to at the moment. So I'm going to add a curve particle generator, and this will just generate points along a curve. The benefit of a curve particle generator is that it offers you more controls in terms of how those points are distributed along a curve. We'll get the same result if I select the particles to array. You can see we have a lot more position points here, and the default number of points for a curve particle generator is 20. So if I bring this value down, I'll get effectively the same result as I had with the curve rebuild. But as I mentioned, there are added controls that you get from using a curve particle generator, and that might be something that you want to take advantage of depending on your use case. I just wanted to make you aware of that as an option. I would say that the curve particle generator is probably a little too complicated of an item for us in this particular example, so I'm just going to keep it simple. So I'll hit delete to actually delete this from the scene. It's going to give me a warning, but I know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to hook this up again. And if we need to increase the resolution, we'll just use our curve rebuild. Okay, so we still don't have the information we need to create a ribbon. So this is where the time component comes in. So I'm going to bring up the timeline, and I'm going to make sure that I'm at frame 0. And let's go back to the path constraint. Let's set the offset back to 0. And now we're going to set a keyframe for the path offset. You can see the keyframes created there. You can't see it in the timeline because this channel is not selected at the moment. If I select it, now you can see this little dot here denoting a keyframe. And let's go up to frame 40 and set this to 100. And now we've keyframed that offset. You can see it plays through the animation, or plays through the timeline. I'm also going to change the time range of our timeline just so things aren't looking so squeezed here. Now, if I go back to my particles to array node here, I can change the mode from single frame to multiple frames. And now I've got position points for what is going to be our ribbon. But I don't need an end time of 120. I only need an end time of 40 so that there are 40 steps along this path. Now, in a front view, you can see that there is some issues. We have evenly spaced position points along the curve, but they start to bunch up at the start and end. And that's because of the default way that Modo sets keyframes. There's easing. So let's bring up an animation editor, and I'm going to keep my particles to array selected, hold Control to also select my path constraint. It's automatically going to show me my animated channel, which is the offset. And you can see here's our easing, right? This is what's causing this bunching at either end. So I'm just going to box select these keyframes and set this to linear. And now we have even spacing, and I'll just hide that panel for now. Okay, so let's take this ribbon, add a create polygons. Let me go into our perspective view here. We can plug our array data into the position value for this. It's not going to give us quite what we want, but if we just change the mode to bridge, let's set this to smooth, and then we don't want it closed. And there we go, we've got our little ribbon. So this ribbon has lots of controls, and we can keep adding more to them, and we will. But I just want to show off a few things that I can do. So let me grab my bend effector, and I'm actually going to add this to the schematic because we're going to end up building controls for this in the next video. So if I take the angle and haul in this channel, you can see that it affects the entire ribbon, right? And let me just add some color to this so that we can see it a little bit better. Something like this. And I'll make it double-sided. Okay, there we go. But since this was made sort of over time, any deformations that we make to this original profile will occur at that point that was keyframed along the curve. So let me show you what that means. So with this selected, I'm going to grab the angle keyframe, or sorry, the angle channel, go back to keyframe 0, and let's just set a keyframe. And then let's move along. And if you notice, you can see the profile along the curve. This kind of helps you know where the deformation is going to occur. And so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to change that value. And you can see that the original start of the curve arc is still in place. And then if I move down here, I can come back the other way. Like so. So I like the look of that. We can also animate this roll value, for example. So I can come back here, set a keyframe for the roll. Let's move forward to here. And see, move this way. And then come back to maybe here. Roll this back the other way. So you can see you have really fine control in terms of how and where your ribbon is deformed. And of course, you can always go back and select your original path and edit the shape of this, and everything's gonna still work. So in the next video, we're going to take this a couple steps further. We're going to add more deformations to our original profile. We're going to add controls that'll make it a little bit easier to deform this through space and time so that we don't have to go wrangling and selecting different things to adjust their different channels. We're going to consolidate them to sort of one control. And then I'm going to show you how to package everything up into an assembly so that you can reuse this in the future.
Yum, yum!